So every child, teen, adult, everyone's unique, right? All their looking and listening is going to look different. I love the idea about journaling some of these actions or behaviors that we're noticing. As a treatment provider, for me, that's so important because that really helps me understand when to intervene or when that child might be ready for that next step. A lot of younger kids specifically, like they'll make grunts or like they might make like animal noises, right?
Welcome back to another episode of the Unspoken Words podcast, a Selective Mutism podcast by the Smart Center, produced and published, as always, by New Edition Productions. This episode features Dr. Elisa Shipon-Blum and Dr. Jenna Blum exploring the look, listen, and learn approach. A compassionate approach that helps parents, educators, and treatment professionals understand what children with selective mutism communicate beyond their silence. Dr. E and Dr. Jenna explore why observing body language and posture tells us more than the absence of speech, and how the same shutdown can mean different things depending on the underlying cause. In the episode, we walk through real-world examples like family gatherings and classroom struggles, and reveal how sensory overload, academic pressure, ADHD, and anxiety show up differently across these settings. They also discuss identifying contributing factors, understanding your child's baseline on the social communication bridge, and why your assessment uncovers hidden reasons that behavioral strategies alone won't address. If you have any questions on anything you hear in today's episode, make sure to head to selectivemutismcenter.org/ask Dr. E, that's ASKDRE, and then follow the podcast on Instagram at unspokenwords_podcast and on YouTube at Unspoken Words Podcast by Dr. E. All right, without further ado, please enjoy the latest episode of the Unspoken Words Podcast.
Before we get started with the episode, you're exhausted from advocating, explaining, and hoping someone finally understands. Well, we do. This summer, consider Communicamp for you and your family. Communicamp is the Smart Center's intensive all-day treatment program designed to help children and teens ages 3 and up build social communication confidence. Over the course of one full weekend, your child or teen receives 15 plus hours of expert-led skill building, while parents receive 15 plus hours of training and support. Our clinicians use Dr. E's evidence-based treatment, SCAT, that's helped thousands of individuals find their voice. Here's what matters. Unlike other programs, your child or teen doesn't need to talk to come to camp. We meet them exactly where they are. We have 3 Communicamp weekends happening this summer, June 26th to 29th, July 16th to 19th, and August 7th to 10th. Visit the link in this episode's show notes to learn more. Stop waiting for your child or teen to grow out of it. Make it happen this summer. All right, enjoy the episode.
Hello, listeners. Welcome back to another episode of Unspoken Words. I am privileged once again to be here with Dr. Jenna. Hello.
Hi, I feel like it's like a frequent thing now.
Yes, it is. I'm enjoying this time with you, and it's really wonderful to just talk about these topics.
Yeah.
And parents and those listening, educators, professionals, really do appreciate kind of the subtleties of a lot of what we talk about. You know, there's parents that are like, all right, give me the strategies, tell me what to do to help my child talk. You know, I need them to talk by this date. And we're like, whoa, back it all up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's back it up. So with that in mind, I think today is going to be about subtleties a little bit. And over the years, I've developed these different terms that help kind of name something, like name either a strategy to make it simpler, to name an understanding. And I do this a lot. And one of the things I've named is something called look, listen, and learn. And it's something we talk about so much.
Yeah, especially when we're in parent lectures and we're kind of talking with different families, because as you mentioned, I think a lot of times we focus so much on the behavioral aspect, right, in treatment, where it's like, okay, well, we want to work on getting our individuals to be more engaging, to get them to, be more socially confident in communicating in various settings. But we don't always think about how we need to be listening and learning from them, right? Because a lot of times they're showing us certain things that I think if we don't necessarily look, listen, and learn, and we'll go through each 3, all 3 today, I think it's really hard to overcome, selective mutism fully, and also for us to really meet our kids halfway. So I'm really excited to talk about this today because I think this is something that we definitely talk a lot about with our families, but I think a lot of the listeners who maybe aren't currently working with us or who just want to continue to learn skills, I think they'll get a lot out of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a compassionate, kind of structured framework that helps adults, others involved in either parenting or the education or treatment of individuals with selective mutism, but honestly, basically their everyday life. I mean, we can just take SM off the table and say why look, listen, and learn is just so important, because our kids, our teens, adults struggling, anyone with anything is telling us so much
Mhm.
by what they don't even say.
Right.
And when we start to look, and I don't mean stare, by the way, listeners, I just mean kind of look at the situation, listen to what they're saying or not saying, and learn from that. What are they telling us by all of this? Their behaviors, their affect in so many ways, how they're engaging, how they're communicating, how they're doing in school. Are they struggling in any way? What are they telling us? And that's what look, listen, and learn is. Because to truly be effective in planning and developing treatment programs, we need to understand them. And we talk a lot about the whys, and we talk about the baseline stages on the social communication bridge. But part of that is look, listening, and learning. So let's talk about look beyond words. Like, what are they not saying, right? When a child isn't speaking, it's so easy to focus on silence and trying to get them to become, what do we do to help them become, more communicative? But if we look at their body language, their facial expressions, their posture, their physical movement, it can tell us so much. Want to share that a little bit about the look?
Yeah, I mean, I think that again, our population really shows us so much more beyond the words because many of our individuals that we work with are, nonverbal and shut down in many different instances when they're not feeling as comfortable. So the look piece is super important because, as you mentioned, those subtleties, right? Those like nonverbal subtleties or a shift in body language really goes so far and can really set our kids up with so much more success if we're starting to become aware of that. So for example, let's say, let's say I'm working with a family and there's a, 9-year-old child, right? And let's say they have a family gathering. And I'm kind of prepping the family, we're talking through it, and they come back and I, start asking about how things went. And mom starts telling me, oh, it went really well. However, the minute that uncle and 3 cousins showed up, I noticed my daughter completely shut down. But it's weird because she hangs out with them all the time. Right. And so I might say, okay, well, that's a great scenario. Like, let's break this down. Like, what did you notice? Like, right, when you looked at your daughter? And so maybe mom goes, well, I guess I did notice that she kind of clung closer to me, like more than typical. Like I noticed that she was kind of like tugging behind me, but I did notice that she was kind of looking in their direction. So she was curious what they were doing, but maybe she was kind of behind me. And so I might say, okay, well, what do you think that shows, right? Like, does that show that she maybe might just need a little bit more warm up time, or she might just need to kind of latch a little bit closer to you because maybe being in like large, loud, lots of people environments can feel overwhelming. So if 5 people walk in, maybe there's a shift in expectation or a shift in just kind of this sensory overload at that time. And so again, like just giving you a little example, but in that scenario, I mean, we obviously can break that down in a whole session or two, but just from that moment, the look piece is where we kind of assess more into like what is your daughter or your child actually doing, right? So she was kind of latching a little bit behind mom, right? Like she was kind of tugging a little bit closer. So in that scenario, to me, as a provider, I could say, well, let's look at that a little bit, right? Like what is that showing us? And so I do think that if we're kind of ignoring those pieces, right, and we're just trying to get her to, well, I wanted her to say hi to uncle, I wanted her to say hi to cousin, right? But we're not seeing that aspect of she's just not there yet. She needs to kind of maybe have a little bit of that warm up time. She's showing you through her actions that she's kind of behind you a little bit because she needs a little bit more of that space to kind of get acclimated again. Maybe just she might have some sensory challenges, right, with some of her contributing whys. So that would be an instance where I would focus so much of that look piece before we even get to listening and learning from that as well. So the looking piece to me is kind of the changes in her facial expression. Maybe she's like looking down, maybe she's, hiding behind mom. So the proximity, right? Like you mentioned, like maybe we're wanting to be a little bit further away. We might gaze a little bit. So there's so many nonverbals that she's showing us in that moment.
And it could be, when you dive deeper into this, and I hear this a lot, maybe mom or dad, had all this like high hopes for interaction. Maybe there was too much of an expectation of, okay, we're going to do interviews, we're going to do our guess who game, we're going to hand out the cookies you made. And there was so much that when that happened, the child felt so much expectation. So I would always be cautious. And this is where you can talk with your treatment provider. What goals or games are you working on, and when do you implement? Warm up is
Mhm.
critical. That's not regression, that's an awareness. So like you said, it was a party, people were coming over, all five came over at once, and maybe they looked right at her. So one of the things I might do is educate the guests coming over, like these are her aunts and uncles, someone that you're probably relatively close to. She sees them, you said, often, and maybe she sees them in, I play with my cousin, and then the dad isn't even there, or he comes in later, or it's a game that she likes and she's had time to warm up. Maybe it's at their house where she feels more actually comfortable because she doesn't feel the pressure of, let's say, one of her parents acts, that's not realizing what he or she is doing. Maybe she's more comfortable at your house in a one-on-one and only cousin comes over. But now dynamics changed, right? So the dynamic changed. So what this tells me is she's not comfortable. So we can't have that, oh my gosh, you need to play your games or say hi, Uncle Bill said hello. You need to kind of like step back and realize, all right, I'm going to step back. I'm going to focus on them. I'm going to kind of let go here and give her some warm up. Maybe
Mhm.
you'll go in the kitchen with her and she'll kind of like hang out next to you for a while and just be okay with it. Parents have these, sometimes I find these expectations that they want to meet. My child regressed if she doesn't say hi, like she's failing in treatment. No, this
Mhm.
is part of it, is understanding that and looking at her body language and what is she telling you by that,
Yeah.
and what are you going to do different next time.
Mhm.
Maybe there was too much expectation. Look, we don't know the exact scenario, right?
I also think that, when it comes to like looking at a situation, as a treatment provider, for me, that's so important because that really helps me understand when to intervene or when that child might be ready for that next step. So as I'm working with them, if I'm noticing again, like their body language initially is a little bit more shut down, maybe I go into the waiting room and I introduce myself. It's the first time I'm seeing this family. I kind of am assessing a little bit. I'm looking at what are the dynamics like? How is this child interacting or lack of, right? And so then I might start to engage. And then all of a sudden, again, I'm kind of like looking around. And if I start to notice maybe the child starts to like look at me a little bit more and their gaze starts to shift, or if I notice like maybe she starts or he starts to giggle a little bit, or, maybe there's a little bit more engagement seeking, kind of like wanting to engage more, showing me something, that's a really like aha moment to say like, okay, like they're getting ready for that next step. So now, as we always say in a lot of different episodes too, we always say like don't wait, facilitate. That shows me like I'm going to facilitate something to see how she might or he might engage in that moment. But if I didn't look and kind of assess like what that child or teen or young adult was doing in that moment, it might be hard for me to know like, is this going to be a successful intervention? Like, what do I do next? So, I definitely think as a treatment provider, so I know we have some listeners that also are not just families, but also other treatment providers. I think that's also something to recognize too, is to kind of think about when is that proper moment. And a lot of times, believe it or not, our kids, teens, and young adults, they're showing us more when they're ready, more than we think. So, it's definitely something to keep in mind.
And we can't go wrong in all these scenarios with warm up. And what are the realistic expectations for when you would expect to be able to implement some of the strategies, and maybe you respect the stages on the bridge, and maybe you go down to like a high five if she's able to, and you educate through the About My Child worksheet of telling Aunt Sally and Uncle Bill, hey, when you first come in, don't address Rebecca right away, like kind of just come in, see us all, and just a wave hi, and don't stare down. I mean, maybe Uncle Bill came in and was like, "Hey, Becky, you're going to talk to me today." Like, I don't know what happened there, but I would imagine that if that was the scenario in that case, that that's probably happening in other locations. So warm up, bridging down, that's okay. And then give and watching her for her comfort, smiling more, giggling more, leaving your side more. And that's when you can start bringing her in through choice, PVC, prepare visuals choices. Maybe it's through baking she's going to make. Maybe you tell them to come sporadically to a party rather than everyone arrive at 5 o'clock. There's so many things, silent goals, as we talk about it, where we set the world up for our kids to be successful. Look, you're not going to always need to do that. You just need to do it now, and you need to do it until your child is a more consistent, confident, social, verbal communicator, or at least reaching the capacity of where they can become in their overall treatment journey. So I
Right.
think we've talked a lot about observing. And again, it's
Mhm.
not staring, listeners.
Yeah.
It's just observing and taking notes. And we often tell our families that we work with, we want you to journal. What was your child's average warm up in different settings? And for our sensitive kids, which we know the vast majority are, they need warm up. And the louder, the larger, the lots of people, the more they know the people, the expectations higher, just
Mhm.
regardless. And the more you need to educate them on when and how to engage, and also setting up big shot roles and opportunities. Maybe it's game playing with cousin, going up to a room for a while, rather, showing her a new game or an activity, or in the kitchen, helping mom prepare a meal or handing things out, taking their coats. There's so many things we can do to help with engagement without having an expectation if they are not ready. Now, next time, maybe the child is like all about it, goes it, opens the door, smiles, and is able to do the high buy game or the high buy copy back or the big five, whatever it is they're doing. Maybe they need to work through a roadmap, an SM roadmap, what the order of events, an action plan, sandwich question. Who's coming? What are they going to ask? The common questions. What is your answer? What can you like? You know what I mean? Like, maybe it's subtleties of getting ready for this, but not in an overbearing way. But the more you do these things,
Mhm.
the more it becomes so natural, and the more that they become more comfortable as they're making the progress. But I always say it's safer to bridge down to then bridge up than to have this huge expectation in the beginning.
Yeah.
So we talked about look. Anything else you want to talk about with look?
I don't think so. I think again, like, all these three, go together, right? So we're like look, listening, and learning. And we're going to get into the listen and learning in a second. But I do think that we don't want to minimize the look piece. Like, as Dr. E said, we're not going to stare them down, but we also, we really do want to subtly really, start to notice some of these things. And I love the idea about journaling some of these actions or behaviors that we're noticing, because I think, again, we're such a big reason for our children's, teens, and young adults and adults' success. So we really want to start tapping into that. And also, the other thing I'll say too is, so many times during like communicamp, we will debrief, during the 3 days that we're with families, we'll say, okay, like, let's talk about a scenario that you practiced the night prior, right in between camp. And there's so many times where a parent will start talking, and right away they're like, this did not go well, right? We went in, we tried to do this activity, and then it just flopped, right? And we'll dive a little bit deeper into like what happened, and we'll stop them, and I'll say, well, I actually didn't hear any failure there. If anything, I feel like that was a successful moment, because you were able to really look at your child in that moment, and now you're listening to them and you're learning about like why that scenario was tough for them. So if anything, I actually see that as a success, because as parents, we are starting to look at the scenarios differently. So there's never times where I say it's quote unquote a flop, like many parents might say, but rather, what's the learning experience that we can take from this? And so that way we can go in the next time even more successful.
Yeah, there's something called kind of plan it and do it. That's when you kind of plan a scenario. We use PVC a lot, plan, prepare, use visuals and choices. They're the safest way to go. But I often say to families, like you said, if something didn't go well, is what may have been missing. What did you not do? We went into Best Buy and I needed to get new computer paper for the project. And I realized that we didn't really talk about it in the car. We didn't like role play a little, where she tends to like and it helps her. I was in a rush. I was all anxious because I needed to get to my son's soccer game. And so I ran in and right away was like trying to implement the SM triangle, and my daughter just shut down. And I go, okay, so you were rushed. You didn't pre-plan. You didn't create like a visual, like maybe your child will do well with like a picture of, the things you're looking at, and you're looking for. You didn't ask a choice. You just said, what are we looking for? Your child didn't get a chance to role play. Like all of these key features that you've done in the past for success, you didn't do. So it's not that it was like your child regressed in treatment. It means that the supports that were needed to have a successful exposure and social communication opportunity weren't there. So now don't go running into Best Buy to get the computer paper at that moment. Or if you do, just don't have an expectation. Just go in and maybe expect nothing but nonverbal. And your daughter, your son will get to the point where you won't need to do this as much. But this particular child needs that at this point in their treatment. They won't be doing it forever, probably not that long at all. But if we don't have the setups there in the beginning where the child sees themselves, hears themselves, and realizes the progress they've made and where they are, like if they're tracking themselves on the bridge and they're getting the points to do whatever in a reward system, not quote unquote for talking, but for doing the goal or the game to make the progress to start crossing the bridge that they're checking off, then they're not going to build on that. They need to be able to build on their successes. So don't see this, as you said, as a flop, but as a learning opportunity to what we need to do to check off. Maybe that parent goes, you know what? I picked her up from school, and normally we have a snack because she's not the best eater in school. And I realized she never got her snack and she was really irritable in the car. And I ran into Best Buy and I did have my PVC, but at the same time, she was really irritable and fighting with her brother. And I realized, you know what? Her blood sugar was low. And normally we don't go right after school. Normally we go at a time where she wasn't overstimulated for 8 hours. Again, she'll be able to do that in the future. She's just not able to do it now in a way. Or maybe had she had her snack, she would have been different because her blood sugar would have been above. So again, we're looking, we're listening, and we're learning so that next time we can tweak, tweak, tweak. What we talk about in treatment often, as you know, it's what's been going well, what's not been going well, and how can we change this so that we can be more successful, and what's coming up this week, what's
Yeah.
coming up next week. And that's what treatment is. It's not just here are the strategies, it's tweaking and understanding when to use what strategy, when and with who, how to do it, and understand that everything's a learning experience. And as long as you're able to get that support to be able to see why was something not successful, because of course we want it to be successful, but if it's not, what can we do so that next time it is more successful?
Exactly. Yeah, it's true.
So let's, we looking and listening and then learning is what we're doing. So with all the looking, we also listened. That child you were talking about was fighting with her brother in the car. She was telling us something by what she was fighting. She was irritable. She was angry. She seemed not herself. We need to learn from that. What is she telling us by what she was doing, what she was saying, and learn from that. You know what? I'm going to take the kids home. I'll just go out later and get computer paper. So as much as we are all about exposures, maybe that wasn't the right time to do an exposure.
Yeah, so I mean, I think in terms of like the listening piece, so again, we've been talking a lot about look, right? So like looking and observing the body language, right? The facial expressions, the gazing, the lack of. We also want to start to listen, as you're mentioning, to the expression that's occurring, or also just sometimes acknowledging that listening can also be a silent listen as well. So sometimes it's not just a physical listen of maybe noticing where and with whom they're communicating with. I mean, that is a part of it, right? Is to listen to maybe see who are they engaging with, observing maybe their reactions to like tones and jokes and emotional moments, right? Like, so noticing if you're listening for any aspects of increased comfort that's occurring. Also, maybe like hearing, maybe like the rhythm of their breathing or like vocal attempts, right? So, like, if you're noticing like a lot of younger kids specifically, like they'll make grunts or like they might make like animal noises, right? So, it could be a physical listen, right? Where you're listening for cues, or you're listening for words that are showing you that they're building this comfort and they're coming in. But it can also be interpreting silence. And I think that's a really big piece is sometimes interpreting silence is also an aspect of listening for them. And sometimes we think of, well, if they're not engaging verbally, then they're not doing anything. But that's actually not true at all. As we're seeing the look piece, we're looking at what they're doing, but also now we're listening for what is this silence about, right? Like what's beneath the silence. So, an example could be potentially, let's say there's like a 12-year-old child who's in school, right? Let's, I don't know, call the child Jace. And maybe like Jace hasn't spoken all year in school. It's now April, right? So Jace hasn't spoken all year in school, but Jace is really participating a lot in group activities. He passes notes to his friends. He's chuckling silently, right? He's responding eagerly to notes, and trying to join games non-verbally. So in this moment, although he's silent, he was very engaged, right? He was socially aware. He was wanting to participate a lot. So in the past, maybe a teacher would say, well, nothing's going on, right? There's nothing going on. This child, I'm attempting to get this child to speak to me and to engage. But a listening moment can be, well, even though we're beyond that silence piece, right? We're kind of like beneath it. There's so much aspects that we can think about where we can listen to what the child is doing. Well, they're passing notes, they're chuckling silently, right? Like he's responding eagerly non-verbally by like wanting to like engage. And so to me, the look piece is recognizing that participation can go beyond those words, right? It can be like the actual physical component of like passing the note or like nodding or like laughing a little. But the listening piece is acknowledging that like these are active social behaviors, and I don't see it as like a withdrawal. I see it as an opportunity to now like maybe push a little bit further, obviously not creating too much increased expectation, but this child's showing you they're getting there. So we're listening for those cues, and we're starting to see like their body language is opening up more. Again, that's that look piece, but the listening piece is also like the next layer beyond that. We'll get back to the episode in a second. If you have a child or teen with social communication challenges, listen up. For more than 20 years, the SMART Center has helped over 6,000 individuals overcome selective mutism. Now we're bringing our expertise to you in a new way. With our 6-week virtual social skills series, over 6 sessions, your child or teen will learn through activities, role plays, and real life practice by learning conversation starters, developing friendships, and managing social anxiety in a safe and supportive space. Our trained clinicians meet every child and teen where they are, whether nonverbal, finding their voice, or already verbal. We run new groups every few months. Visit the link in this episode's show notes to register your child or teen today. All right, let's get back to the episode.
And I would like to be clear with our listeners. We often get these, cases where families will come to us having, been mute all year or mute for many, many years. And so our goal is that when we're learning about them through the selective mutism eval, their whys, their baseline stages, that pretty quickly we're educating teachers on what strategies to utilize. And this particular boy, Jace, had started at the center. I think I know who you're talking about, had started maybe 6 weeks ago. So they had been mute all year. And upon further questioning, Jace was pretty shut down for most of the year. And then it was determined that he did have a learning challenge, and now he's feeling more supported. He's socially engaged, like you said, and he's feeling better about himself because his comfort is there. So I want our listeners to understand he's telling us a lot. He's telling us, hey, I'm more comfortable getting myself more. I'm understanding myself more, and the teachers are supporting me more, and I'm feeling good. So his body language, what he's doing, is showing that this is a great opportunity for educators to begin bridging him up. So they're sitting purposely with a buddy, 2 buddies that he ironically knows well. One of them is from his neighborhood. Another is in his music class. He really likes them. Now we are purposely buddying him because, believe it or not, they hadn't been, prior. And so now he's sitting near his buddies. So he's kind of giggling and he's more comfortable. We educate the teachers to perhaps, as you're walking around, ask a choice, prompt him to tell Robert. So this or that, no answer, this or that, tell Robert. And then we educate the teachers to repeat without eye contact. So what you're doing is you're subtly bridging up. Now, we don't want to make him feel like he's standing out, but we will just naturally do that as we may ask another child a question. So, do you want the environment, study the environment or the government? No answer. Environment or government? Tell Robert. Naturally utilizing the verbal intermediary, but we also want to ask a question because we gave him that 10 to 20-second time. We asked the question so he got to process it. So he heard the teacher say, hey guys, want you to decide if you want to study the environment or the government. And he's starting to think about it. And he's realizing, oh, I want to study the environment. So you gave him that warm up. You gave him the time to process because he has some learning challenges that affect processing. The teacher might even say, hey guys, why don't you write down what you want? And then the teacher naturally says environment or government to his friend. He answers. Maybe by giving him that warm up, his ability to write it, maybe the teacher might say to him, hey, Jace, environment or government. She avoids direct eye contact. And the child, and maybe Jace naturally will say environment. We giving him the chance to be verbal, but if not, we gave him that 10 to 20 seconds, no answer, repeat, tell Robert. And maybe he turns to Robert because he's verbal with Robert and he says environment. And the teacher says, okay, environment, and then moves on. Doesn't say, oh my God, you spoke, I heard you. So I want our listeners to understand that he's telling us by his body language that he's more comfortable. We're looking at that. We're listening. As an educator, we want to know what are the signs to bridge up, and those are the signs. But what if Jace was very shut down? What if he looked anxious? What if his buddies weren't there that day? What if he wasn't being buddied up? What if the teacher asked an open-ended, thought-provoking question that shut him down? These are things we need to know. And so I want our listeners, I know I went a little long-winded there, and you know that I can. I feel like it gives our listeners a real understanding of, all right, now what?
Yeah.
And that is a great opportunity because he looks comfortable. He's smiling. He's making good eye contact. It is an opportunity to bridge up, but it's how you bridge up. What strategies work best? We talked about the fact that Jace has a learning issue. And one of the things that occurred when we figured that out was that he wasn't starting and completing work on time. He took a lot longer. And we realized that that was a big why for him. And so I think it's important that our listeners realize that. And we learned a lot. And now he's feeling better about himself because he feels that support.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I think it's very important. So, again, like as we're talking about all these things, you can see how they all really overlap with each other, right? Because, of course, as we're looking and we're listening for things, we're seeing and observing a lot. I think that's a really big aspect to, the last piece, which is the learning part. So, from looking and from listening, we can really reflect and respond now with purpose. So, instead of looking at the scenario in a way where we don't see as much success or we say, oh, this didn't work as well, we can kind of look at it differently. And we can think about all the things that we looked for and we listened for. And now we can learn from that child's behavior or teen or adult's behavior and use that insight to really guide how we respond next, right? So every child, teen, adult, everyone's unique, right? All their looking and listening is going to look different. But I do think that, the hope is that this type of intervention and framework is really helpful because it really can help support, and really begin, really allow us to really start to understand maybe, like you said, like these underlying whys more, whether it's rooted in anxiety, maybe there's, underlying learning challenges as you're mentioning, maybe there's, some sensory aspects. So in that situation with the child where she shut down because her 5 family members came over. Remember, I mentioned one of her underlying whys was she had some sensory challenges. So we really want to stay attuned to some of those underlying whys because that could definitely be attributing to why they're shutting down more when we look and we listen to some of those things as well. So I think that's really important. I think that when we're, learning, it's also important to first start by identifying the child's current stage on the social communication bridge. So we're like learning from a education standpoint too, of like, where do we feel like they can get to? And like you said, maybe it's not thinking about them so far along the bridge if we feel like we want to set them up for success. But at the same time, I always say sometimes like the sweet spot could be like stage 2, which is our transitional, because if we know potentially they could bridge up to verbal, but we're also not sure. A lot of times they might use you as a verbal intermediary. Then sometimes just always prompting for nonverbal can also be a lack of opportunity, right? So we can learn from, well, why don't we start with prompting, oh, well, tell me, do you want this or that, right? And if they answer loud enough, we can always look at that person and say, did you get that, right? Which could allow us to maybe bridge up to stage 3. But if they whisper to you very quietly, then we're in that traditional stage 2, right? But if they also freeze, it's okay to then bridge down and learn again from that instance and say, did you want this? And then maybe prompt for like a head nod, right? So I definitely think, again, the learning piece is to me, I mean, I know I said the look piece is the most important, but I think all three of them are important, because the learning piece is how we can now move forward and how we can change things for the future to really set up even more successful interventions. So we definitely want to think about all of these pieces together as we navigate.
You know, you said something where I heard you naturally bridging down. And I want our listeners to understand that if a child is not speaking in a certain situation, or if you implement it or trying to implement a strategy, it's not a failure if they're not verbal. And I need to repeat that. They are not failing. It's not regression. If a child is, or a teen, or whomever you're talking about here, is not verbal, it means that they weren't able to in that moment, and you need to figure out why. But bridging down to either an intermediary, using sounds for young kids, or even non-verbally, is still on the bridge. And what I have found in my experience working with families with selective mutism is that when you're okay with bridging down, and the message to the child isn't, oh my God, you failed, you should have spoken, like, oh, I can't believe you didn't answer the store clerk, or I can't believe you didn't say hi to Aunt Sally. And you get, you don't do that, and you kind of accept it. It actually fuels the child to be willing to try and make more progress. And I think that's really important, because I have found, and we hear this a lot in our individual care, and we also hear it with teachers sometimes, but we hear it at Communicamp a lot. Like, well, if my child didn't talk, I figured that they failed. Like, they're not being brave enough. They're not being courageous enough. And many of these kids just walking into a room, or handing money to a store clerk, or turning to their friend and saying a word, or shaping sounds into words, or using an intermediate, that's courageous. Just showing up sometimes. And so I want to be clear that it's okay. Now, that doesn't mean that the message you say to your child is, you don't need to talk, don't worry. That's not the message. The message is, the goal is to help them make the progress. But if you notice that it's not happening by the way you question, like if I asked a choice and the child wasn't verbal, or I asked a direct question at some point and they weren't verbal, I bridge down to a choice. If they're still not, I may bridge down to a tell me. That doesn't mean you failed. It just means you bridge down. And what we have learned is that it's okay, and that the more you accept it, the more they bridge up, because they don't feel the pressure and they feel the acceptance.
Right, right.
And I think that's a really, really, really important part for families to understand. And when they start to take that deep breath of, wow, I'm going to stop saying you need to and you should, and telling them you need to be brave and courageous to talk, but not being brave, you're not being brave and courageous to tell me, that's the wrong message. And that creates more anxiety, more avoidance, and regression, actually.
And I actually think, what's really fascinating too is we can look at these three foundational tools, like the look, listen, and learn, in a strategic way, where maybe you are a parent who's listening and you're like, oh no, like, is that me? Like, I didn't realize maybe I was doing that, right? Maybe you haven't been in treatment yet, or, you're just navigating some of these things for the first time. Maybe what I recommend is start to now shift maybe some of those ways, and kind of maybe shift lowering more of that expectation, or thinking about like, more successful ways to bring your child into communication. And again, use these tools, look, listen, and learn from that. So like, now that you're shifting your ways, you might notice a big shift in your child, right? You might notice a big shift in their body language, their facial expressions, the way that they do communicate, or again, how their silence shows you something when you're listening for it. And then also, again, learn from that for the future. So it's always like, we're always learning and we're always moving forward. And like you mentioned, in our treatment too, we're always learning and tweaking and tweaking and tweaking, but we take these look and listen moments and keep shifting that. And that's where the learning piece comes from. So to me, we're always learning. I think I'm always learning from the clients I work with, right? Each time I kind of connect with them. And that's why, like, sometimes even in initial treatment, I mean, we obviously, like you said, we provide so many tools and strategies, but a lot of our work is so individualized because it's everyone's unique, right? It really depends on the child, the teen, the adult we're working with,
I mean,
right?
that's
The
what we're
way
doing, right? Every time you do an assessment, a family comes to us or a school, contracts with us to do a selective mutism eval. We are learning.
Mhm.
We are assessing. I say this all the time. We assess to learn to then be able to treat.
Yeah.
We don't just have someone come and say, here are the strategies. We don't know what they are
Right.
or how to implement when and with who until we learn about them.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
any treatment plan that a family is in, they should be with a provider that can conceptualize their presentation. What is it about that child or teen or adult that is preventing them from being a confident social verbal communicator? And that is about what it is. The SME, the selective mutism eval, is all about conceptualizing.
Yeah.
So if families are like, look, I want to understand my child, I want our teachers, we can certainly provide that. That's not a big deal. We can do it. And then you have this detailed presentation of your child that you can either share with your provider, your school, etc. I
Right.
want to kind of share a couple questions that came into the center and
Yeah.
kind of walk through it because I think it's going to be very helpful. A parent of a 13-year-old wrote in, Dr. E, Dr. Jenna, my daughter's 13. In class, she is doing her schoolwork, but she does not speak to or engage with peers at all. She is completely separated. She doesn't engage. The teachers say she will answer questions. She's doing well in school. She's not having any issues academically, but we don't know what to do to help her talk to peers. And so that's a hard thing because when the family wrote that Ask the Doc or to both of us, upon further evaluation, I said to the parent, we don't know anything about them. And it turns out they ended up coming to the Smart Center and we did an eval. Turns out that she's not interested in peer relationships, never has been. She's 13, never really had a friendship nor interested in kids. She had a very strong interest in anime and characters, does well academically. She's very, very bright, but she's very indifferent. When the kids are laughing or doing something, she just kind of sits there. Well, you know where I'm going with this. Upon further evaluation, it was suggested that she had some other behaviors, somewhat ritualistic behaviors, kind of socially awkward behaviors, and didn't seem to read social cues well. She misinterpreted her siblings a lot. She didn't understand humor well upon further evaluation. It turns out we recommended further testing and we recommended autism testing. Turns out she had a level 1 autism. And that explained a lot as to what was going on that was preventing her or causing her great difficulty in interacting and verbalize. She had nothing to say. She didn't have an interest either. So I think that's a really important look, listen, and learn. What was she telling us by her body language, her response to peers, over the course of her lifetime, being able to have a friendship? But what was confusing to the family was that when she did anime, she would talk to these kids in a club. So the parents were like, she does talk, she talks to peers, but it was over the anime, Dr. Jenna. It was over the anime.
Right. Right.
It wasn't a true friendship. And so that has to be differentiated. It
Mhm.
was over the anime character that she was interested in, not the actual friendship with that child.
Right.
So
So it's
you've
kind
seen cases like this.
Yeah, no, I mean, it definitely sounds like it stems more from like the restricted interest aspect of like when she's in that specific environment, that's where she is the most socially engaging. But like you mentioned, it's mostly about engaging through her own play and her own interests rather than the actual like interactive aspect of engagement. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting point, and I know we just released an episode that talks a lot about the comorbidity between selective mutism and autism, just because, for those listeners, maybe this is like your first podcast episode. I think that's a perfect example of a time where it's like, well, how do we differentiate that? Like, what does that look like? And again, we just released that a whole 45-minute or so episode that kind of talks a lot about like those presenting aspects, right? For just selective mutism, just kind of when you have autism and then kind of that comorbidity. But again, I think that's such a fascinating case. And we see it a lot where, again, like we're really constantly assessing, we're constantly thinking about, looking at what's going on, listening for what's going on, and then also learning from that as well. So we're like constantly on that movement piece where we're really trying to like create the best treatment plan possible. And to me, we're always kind of tweaking
So
things.
imagine the frustration too, right? Like you're saying, like imagine the frustration that that 13-year-old had because she had no interest. She really didn't read social cues well. She didn't feel good about herself around peers. She just wasn't interested. She just sat there seemingly disinterested. But she felt bad about herself when everyone was like, why aren't you talking to them? Why aren't you asking them to come over? Why aren't you doing this? Why don't you go up and say hello? It was so uncomfortable for her. So
Mhm.
that awareness was very helpful. It helped the teachers understand, also helped them with clubs and activities and how to get her motivated. I mean, she actually could verbalize. She just wasn't because she just was having a tough time even knowing what to say. So we
Right,
worked on the write and read and script approach, but we also worked on common questions that people could ask, conversation starters,
right,
conversation expanders. We worked on action plans, who was going to be there, what could they ask, what would be your answer. We had to actually methodically work through these things
right,
because it wasn't as natural to her, lower the anxiety. She didn't even look anxious.
right, right.
It wasn't like she was shut down, a flat affect. She just looked comfortable. She
Mhm.
just wasn't able to. And so that look, listen, and learn told us so much of what direction to go to. And then there was another question or another situation that came up where a family with a younger child, 6 or 7 years old, presented. And I want to just bring this up. And she presented with SM. She was verbal with peers on the playground, very verbal, interacted with peers. She had no trouble with doing that. In the classroom, she did not. And
Mhm.
the teachers noticed, and we noticed this in the School of Out form, that she had difficulty starting and completing tests on time. She would look at her friends' papers. She took longer to complete things. She really struggled, and she became a behavioral issue, is always surrounding look, listen, and learn the academics. So
Mhm.
upon further evaluation, she was verbal. She could answer the teacher. She wasn't initiative, elaborative, and expressive, but when anything academic came up, that's when they saw a lot of difficulty. And she wasn't spontaneously verbalizing with peers in the classroom. And if you think about it, a lot of things in the classroom are academic related. Out in
Right.
recess, she was able to be free and started verbalizing. So that was a look, listen, and learn, right? What was she telling us by not verbalizing, not communicating effectively during academic related tasks? What was she telling us by looking at her friend's paper, taking a longer time to start and do her work? What was she telling us? By not even what she was saying, but by her
Right.
nonverbal communication, by what she wasn't able to do.
Mhm.
What was she telling us about what she could do on at recess with her friends when she didn't have the academic
Right.
pressures? Well,
Right.
needless to say, the school put together a behavioral functional plan to become verbal. But
Mhm.
upon further evaluation, I'm like, whoa, we need to get testing. She's telling us something.
Mhm.
Turned out she had ADHD and she had other, I think she had other learning challenges that really affected her overall confidence, but her ability to do her work. And we needed to develop school based accommodations interventions to help her because she had some learning challenges that were affecting her ability to do her work. And that affected her self esteem. It affected her anxiety in class because she wasn't confident. Her self esteem was lower. And once we learned and we were able to accommodate her properly, what do you think happened? Her confidence went up. She became more successful. She started to verbalize freer because she wasn't as shut down, as anxious in the classroom. So the
Right.
anxiety in that case, because she didn't seem timid, and you know what I say, when there's a child with SM that's not overly timid, what else is going on that's causing that mutism, that
Mhm.
lack of social communication? So
Yeah.
again, look, listen, and learn. It's all about look, listening, and learning.
Yeah, it's an interesting case too. And again, it talks so much about these underlying contributing factors. So we're always looking at some of those underlying pieces. And that's a huge piece that we start with at the Smart Center because we don't just treat to speak, we treat all these underlying factors. So both of those cases are very useful, and it's how we continue to interpret and really make an effective treatment plan.
And for families that are thinking about intensive group treatments that are in school settings, there are many out there. We have Communicamp. We have them in actual schools. And one of the advantages to going to these programs is that the clinicians, in our case, we have clinicians working as counselors. They're able to observe your child within a classroom as well to see how your child is interacting with peers as comfort is being built, how they're responding to strategies. They're learning best strategies for progression. They're progressing the children into speech. We are one of the only programs that accept nonverbal children. They don't have to speak to counselors to enter into camp because we do respect the stages on the bridge, and almost all of our kids progress into speech at camp, but we're learning about them. So if you're considering it, parents, a suggestion would be to go, because not only are you going to learn a lot for many, many hours over a course of days, but your child is going to see, hear, and, see the success they can have within a school setting that allows them to have that progress. So look into different programs. You're welcome to contact us about Communicamp. We're really proud of this program that we've been doing. We must have had 50 of them already for over the many years. We are very experienced in this program, and we welcome you to think about that opportunity, because your child will make progress and you will learn a lot, and to know how to support your child. So again, think about these intensive treatments that allow that intensive amount of time to learn about your child and make that progress within a school setting. So send in your questions, listeners. We're here for you. We're passionate. This is what we do every day, all the time. And we want you to understand your child, your teen, your adults that you're here for, the adult listening, the treatment provider. We're hoping you gain those skills and understanding to help the person in your life become a more confident social verbal communicator. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Unspoken Words, a Selective Mutism podcast hosted by me, Dr. E, and the Smart Center. This episode and all episodes of Unspoken Words is produced by New Edition Productions. Don't forget to submit any questions you have from today's episode using our Ask Dr. E form on our website. Just head to selectivemutismcenter.org/ask-DRE. I'd love to answer your question in a future episode or blog post. Remember, for the best of this episode and every episode of Unspoken Words, please follow the podcast on Instagram and YouTube. We are at Unspoken Words _podcast on Instagram and Unspoken Words by DRE on YouTube. Or join our newsletter for additional SM content. We release new episodes every other Monday at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll see you next time.